Right, so here we go. So, welcome to the Healthy Power Alliance podcast. I'm Pete Burden, and I'm a member of the Healthy Power Alliance, and we're dedicated to spreading the use of healthy power throughout the world. And on this podcast, we're exploring healthy power, which and really what it means to be powerful together, especially for organizations and for communities, and essentially how that can benefit other people and the planet we all depend upon. And what we're doing is essentially we're talking to people who are doing it, who are kind of bringing healthy power into their organizations. We're also talking to people who are advising and supporting people who are doing that, and also academics. Um, and we love kind of theory, but the essence of this is to keep it really kind of practical. So I'm here today with Zak Mensah. Thank you. It's lovely to have you, Zak. Very much appreciate it.
Great to
Um,
be here.
Great. And I'll just do a little intro, but you can correct me where I'm kind of getting it wrong or missing things. You're the co-CEO of Birmingham Museums Trust, which is an organisation based in Birmingham. And for international listeners, Birmingham's the second largest city in the UK. And the trust looks after, I think it's 9 museums and art venues, and has more than 1 million objects to kind of care for. But as I understand it, BMT is much more than just looking after those venues and objects, because you have a very kind of radical vision for engaging the people of Birmingham by using those objects and those venues to kind of create stories that kind of make meaning with people. And that's all about kind of embracing, I love this term you use, the super diversity of Birmingham to create hope, social trust, belonging, and solidarity. Does that sound about right in terms of
That's
what you're up to?
a very good summary. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And personally, I find this, a really inspiring kind of vision. And just to say, we met because as part of all of that work, I know you're very committed to actually bringing in the practices of healthy power, whatever that means to you, and how it kind of plays out, that underlie those things. Both bringing that into the organisation in the terms of sociocracy and consent-based decision making, but also I'm interested to hear maybe later about what you're doing in terms of how that relates to the public that you ultimately serve. So I've got a bunch of questions, Zak, and I'll just kick off and ask a few, if that's okay, and give you some space. But just before I do that, I just wanted to say that we know that power is a highly contested word. So we're using a very simple definition of it, which is basically the ability to get one's goals met. Okay. So healthy power is the same thing. It's the ability to get your goals met, but doing that in such a way that actually increases other people's power and kind of looks after the planet as well. So could you first tell me, what does healthy power mean to you, and why do you think it's important?
For me, healthy power is about this idea that working together through connection is a good thing, and that if you do it well, it enables people in all parts of the touch points of that dynamic to feel that they have agency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't always mean that everyone gets equal say, because that's not what it's all about. That's one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about is today. It can get quite confusing around this idea that if you say you want to share your power, that means that everyone gets to do what they want to do. That's not always the case. But a healthy version of that then is about giving that process the correct inputs, whether they be advice, whether they be direction, whether it be resources, in order to achieve the best outcome for the whole. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why I say the whole is because quite often, when you are in a position of power, you are doing things that don't necessarily serve you as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's often where that balance of power can become difficult for people, because it can be very difficult to try and have a healthy power across an organization, say, even if it personally costs you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So by that, are you talking about using power in service of a bigger goal or something? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah. So in our case, you mentioned it at the beginning, that we're here to help demonstrate how Birmingham people have made change in the world through belonging, hope, social trust. And that's what we're here for. But within that, every day, 1,000 decisions get made in an organization. And you have to keep looping back to that bigger picture, which is about a we rather than an I thing.
Okay. So individually, you're making decisions, maybe with other people, but it's kind of keeping that vision in mind is a big part of it. And just say a little bit more, if you can, about, I mean, why that's so important for BMT specifically, perhaps.
So as part of our values, we talk about this idea of social trust, and that applies both externally, so the residents and people who we interact with, but it also means internally. And trust is something that we believe is a foundation of the organization. Therefore, if we want people to trust us, we have to be able to flip that on its head as well. And so that's, for me, an important part of this.
Okay. But just out of curiosity, when did you first start kind of thinking about power at all? When did that, in your life, in your career, when did that come up? Was it something you always knew about, or?
I've always been aware that there is power, but what I would always say is, well, I don't know how long I've been thinking about this or where I first got it from, but I remember reading something that said power is just about convincing someone to do something that you want them to do, and that power gets corrupted when people force people to do things in a way that's not seen equitable. And so I've always thought about that in the service of the work that I'm doing, that I've been working in the museum sector now for a decade, and I get a lot of stuff done. I'm known for getting things done, and that's all good. But along that journey, I guarantee you, at various points, what was perceived as my power has changed over time. Kind of like, for those of you who are listening, ever follow the Super Saiyan characters? The different power levels that these superheroes have, and you may not even realize that you've got this power. And I think you can gain power, and you can also lose power. Which is really interesting.
It's coming and going. You mean it's been coming and going during this time?
Yeah, and I would say that a really good reminder for me, a sort of reset all the time, is none of my neighbours care about what I do. So the power that I may be able to exert in my influence in my workplace is not the same as a power dynamic outside. So there's different types of power as well. And in this case, we're talking particularly about organizational power. I'm very aware of it, particularly in this role now as co-chief executive. There's a phrase I would say, it's just two simple words. It's called Zak says. And I noticed it probably the first 6 months in the job, that certain things would get done rightly or wrongly. And if it was wrong, I'd say, well, why did you do that? And they said, Zak said to do it. And so, this thing became its own sort of entity. And a lot of that also came from people would interpret what other people heard or thought that I'd said. And so people would often say, well, Zak wants it done that way. And so for me, I saw that there was power, even when I wasn't saying it. So even when I'm not using the words, I'm aware that other people may use my power to help their situation, for good and for bad.
Yeah, so you have to become very aware of your own power, really, and
yes,
regardless of whether you're explicitly saying something. Great. And tell us a bit more then about the organization and how you're kind of seeing the use of power in the organization. I mean, that you're talking about your own role as co-CEO, but what are you doing with other people, and how's that going, I suppose?
So there's about 150 staff who work across the trust. It's an independent charity. Then we have a whole suite of volunteers and also then partners in our supply chain to help us get what we want to get done. So, it's not a real number, but it's definitely in the several hundreds, if not 500 plus probably in that sphere of, the organization. So that's the kind of scale that we're talking about. There's also that in my role, I also then get involved in the museum and culture sector, both nationally and internationally. So there's kind of, again, different layers about how the organization operates. And we operate on 9 physical sites in Birmingham. And that keeps us all very, very busy.
I bet. And then talk a little bit about the way power works in the organization. I suppose what I'm curious about is, I know from talking to you that you wanted to bring in more kind of distribution of power and more healthy power in that sense. And we all know it's difficult, isn't it? It's tricky. So if it's okay, talk about some of the successes or some of the things that you found harder, perhaps.
So, should I repeat the question? Sorry.
Um, in the process of bringing healthier power into the organization, so you're very clear that that's something you want to do. You want to do it. Obviously, it's not easy, though, is it? And you gave a great example of how even personally, people are just going to say, Zak says, even if you haven't. So, but more generally, how has it been going? So are there things where you've managed to have an impact in terms of distributing power and getting healthier forms of power in, and areas also where it's been difficult?
Yeah, so on the positive side, I would say that the organization, like many organizations, it's not specific to my organization, are very used to hierarchy, very used to responsibility sitting at the top, either at the very top or near the very top. And it meant that the reason people keep saying, what does Zak say? Or my job share, Sarah, and because they were sort of waiting for instruction. So I'm really, 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 really good, I like to think, at my job. However, I'm not always right. And the whole point of me having 150 other people in the organization is to make better decisions. And one of the things, again, early in my role here was I was really worried that I kept making decisions and almost never had pushback. And no matter how good you are, there's no way you can make, 100% correct decisions all the time. The world's most elite athletes, hit a ball or win a race, every 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So the percentages are quite low, right? They're like, call it 20% strike rate. And there's yet me making decision after decision that everyone's saying yes to. And I was thinking, there's no way that this can be correct. Like, I'm just using my limited knowledge and time on something to make it better. And so I started to plant the seeds with people to say, if you know this area better than me, if you know what we should be doing, let's find a way together. You can say it. It doesn't make it feel like you're going to lose your job if you get it wrong. And that the way that I did that, in all honesty, is I just keep telling people, I have to keep repeating it, because what I've realized is when you say it once, you can't assume that people have heard the message and actually staff come and go, right? But I keep saying, if you get it right, I'll say, X did a really good job. If it goes wrong, Zak takes the blame. Because ultimately, the whole point of being a co-chief executive is you're responsible. So even when someone gets something wrong, even if they ignore you, I am still responsible. I am the face, and I am the signed person who's responsible for the organization. So I tell people all the time, and they think that I'm joking, use that to make sure you can make the best decision. And when you get it wrong, I'll take the flak for it, because that's ultimately how it's got to work, right? So started to plant some of those seeds, started to find out from people what it is that they wanted. And to do that, I mentioned about social trust. We had to build trust. So I constantly try my best to meet people. But again, with 150 staff, it's not easy. It's certainly not easy to build a deep rapport with lots of people, because they're simply not going to have the time to get to know those people. And like when I walk into a room, people often then have that immediate kind of like, oh, I'm worrying about what does Zak think? And so what I've been doing, there's a number of different things, but one of the concrete examples I'd like to give is we introduced an anonymous form. It's a very simple Google form that allows people to ask us any question in the whole organization, and it's anonymous. You can ask the question and then you get a response. That allowed people to feel that they were being heard, and it allowed them to challenge me in a way that they knew that they could be safe. So given that safety was a really important part, of doing this. Now, did I want to do it originally? No, I did not, right? Because I was really worried that if it's always anonymous, it feels then like it's an untrusting organization, because actually the reason why it's anonymous is people don't feel they can tell me. But I have to accept that the job title means that people don't trust me fully because they're worried that if they say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, that their card is marked. And that's not a me thing. That's just a thing. That's just you're always going to be worried about what your boss, is thinking. And the truth, again, as someone else told us ages ago, is that very few people think about other people when they leave the workplace. Whereas you might stew over something that Zach said for a long, long time. But of course, I would have moved on to one of the many other decisions I got to make.
Yeah, of course.
So that's a really important part. I think to the point around where it can go wrong or where it can be difficult is that people quite rightly want to have a job, right? And so at the moment, people worry so much that every decision they make is, keeping them in a job, that there's no ability for people, or very little ability for people, to feel they're able to make mistakes. And that's something that I'm still trying to grapple with the power part, because I hadn't quite appreciated it in this job. People assume that that I've got to where I am purely because it was always going to be that way. It was always ordained that I did that. And actually, I started in the organization lower down in the sort of hierarchy, and I've always had a similar attitude. So for me, the power dynamic has never been one of, oh, they're always right, they're in charge. My job has always been, how can I help them make the best decision they can? And if they keep making decisions I don't agree with, it's my choice to leave. Now, I actually hold agency. No one makes me come to work. I choose to come to work, and they can never take that off of me. And so I've kind of always used my brain to be a little bit more kind of like, I do work for someone, but ultimately, like, I'm not doing it at all costs.
This is brilliant, Zach. Thank you. I mean, you're talking about kind of what I really wanted to talk about, which is kind of the attitudes and the way we approach work, which kind of make this work. I also know that you've experimented with kind of circles and consent-based decision making and so forth. And this isn't just about that. It's more about the attitudes and the practices. But I am also curious. I mean, do you think a circle structure and consent-based decision making and things like that can help with some of this, in at least in the sense of highlighting issues like trust? I mean, I have a common experience working in circles with people that people have to learn to kind of first speak up, and then they have to learn to say something and know they won't be shot down.
So we've been experimenting with sociocracy and working circles probably now about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. First informally, and then through the guidance from yourself, Pete, and others at Outlandish. And that's been it's a journey. I would have said by now that I would have thought offering to give people power would mean that everyone took it straight away. But actually, what I've discovered is a lot of people think it's a trap again. They think, it can't be this simple. And what I've also then learned, connected to the working circles, etc., is that power is a thing, but so is responsibility. And I think a lot of people think about wanting the power without the responsibility.
Yeah.
And what we've been quite clear about is you get the power and you get the responsibility. So actually, when you do get it wrong, if you got it wrong massively, it is more of an issue because you've been giving yourselves the domain to say, oh no, I've got this, right? And so if I think you've got this, you've got this. And so, a simple example for me is, I guess, again, I like Formula One. And, when that driver gets the next seat, they trust that the engineer or whoever has checked their seatbelt. And the driver expects them to check their seatbelt, right? And that's, for me, a sort of micro example of when we gave people that power, that I wanted them to also have the responsibility. I think the power thing they sort of got, the responsibility part was more difficult because, again, the traditional hierarchy organization, people assume that the more responsibility automatically must mean you have to be the highest earning salaries staff. And so there is a challenge for us, right? To how do you give people power in an equitable way that isn't necessarily just about money, but also to be clear that I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay people better if they get to have more responsibility, because actually there's a thing, right, where they should be able to do that. So I think on that journey, we're quite a way away from that. But I would love to see ways in the future where actually you could say, if you're part of this circle, it does come with a salary, because a salary that reflects the type of work they've got to do. But it does then mean you've got to take that responsibility. So I think that's a key key thing from it. And I want, we employ 150 bright people. I want those people to feel they've got agency. I want those people to feel that we can innovate together. I want those people to understand that, the power of expectation, and that is the quiet part of power sometimes, expectation, responsibility, that I need people to do, because I know that it will be a better organization. If we can get the hive mind, that will be a much better organization. And by that, I do mean the last 20%, Pareto's law, 80-20 rule, where 20% of the effort is 80% of the output. So if we can really focus then on the next 20%, if we can make marginal gains of making better decisions, it will be an unstoppable organization.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a huge shift, does it? But marginal gains. And just say a little bit then, you mentioned your values earlier. So in terms of people being able to kind of exercise that responsibility or take that responsibility, is that also then tied to the values and to the purpose? I mean,
Absolutely,
I said your purpose is inspiring to me, but how do you make it inspiring to the people inside the organization?
I think it's about, again, particularly on belonging, making sure that people, we work in service of other people, and those other people may include your colleagues. So for us, I want people to feel they belong there. I want someone to say, I got a job in, I don't know, digital, therefore I know what's best for the organization in that area because it's why you hired me. And so my job is to lay the conditions for other people to do their best work. And by doing it collectively means we can all make those decisions, because there are oftentimes I get to see the helicopter view of the organization that allows me to say, actually, there's this thing you've not thought about, or, you're so used to thinking about today and tomorrow. I'm trying to think 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And so there's a different part of my brain within this role that I have to think about, that I just want to help others also understand that. And then through that, we can kind of go, I always rank things on crap, average, good, or great. And I tell people at any one time, we're floating somewhere in there. And how do we go from making crap decisions to making great decisions? And we are making good and great decisions. How do we keep that? And how do you keep up that level in a way that feels like it's safe for everyone? Because ultimately, coming to work should be about hope. You should be able to say, I've come here to try and make my dent in the world. In our bit of the world, it's civic. We're a civic organization. We're for people, by people. Wouldn't it be great if we left it slightly better than it was when we first started? And that's, I mean, to be really clear, that's no disrespect to how it was before. Because again, sometimes this is the idea that the organization's only going to be better once I'm here, and it's like, no, actually, I think more equitable power just means better decision making. It means a healthier organization. It means that people will flourish and feel confident. And that attitude thing is really important, right? Having the confidence to do your best work is important. If you don't feel that you've got agency and the power, you tend to shrink away and you won't make the best decisions.
Great, lovely. So thank you. This is great. I just want to bring it to something maybe slightly more personal. So, you said you're co-CEO with Sarah. How does kind of power and healthy power kind of play into your relationship together, if you don't mind talking about that?
Sure. Yeah. So me and Sarah, we both work 3 days a week together, and we're quite different people, different backgrounds, different ideas about how sometimes things can get done. And for us, working together has been fantastic. We definitely made better decisions. And the way we do that is quite simply about how we share our power. Is we have this little saying that is this a hill you're prepared to die on?
Okay.
And by that we mean, when someone's making a decision, of which we make many, many decisions every day, does that decision need both of us? Is it something really thorny that we have to both think about that might impact the organization for 10, 20, 30 years, or you can't undo it once you make the decision? If there is, great, let's talk about that, right? But most of the time, it's a trade-off. So taking Sarah's huge, energy and brain, and then taking my more modest-sized brain, and us going, let's think this through together. But if for any reason we haven't got time to speak to each other, but it feels important. I trust you to make the best decision that you can. And if it's wrong, I still back you. And likewise, if I'm wrong, and it's usually often not fully, so oftentimes it's reversible. So even if someone like, it's now, we're speaking now at 3 p.m. on a Friday. I've had a serious meeting just now with a stakeholder that's worth £1 million. Like, it might go one way or the other, right? What I didn't want to do is disturb Sarah, who's on her way to Berlin right now, and say, oh, well, can you help me with this thing? And so I know that she trusts the decision I'm making. And on Monday, if it isn't quite right, it is still the ability to turn that around.
Yeah.
So that's a really important part for us. And I think, again, it comes back to this idea of trust. Like, trusting each other is the foundation, I think, to power sharing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's the same kind of dynamic, isn't it, as with the broader organization and the broader team, but you've managed to achieve that with Sarah by building that kind of trust. Can you say, I mean, what have you done, just out of interest, how have you done that? I mean, in case it gives any lessons for how to do it with the wider organization as well. Or was it important that you were both named as co-CEO? Did that help?
It was super important for us to be making sure that we had equity. So it was like, we made sure that our job description is the same, our pay is the same, we work the same amount of time, we have roughly the same areas that we think about separately, and the workload is evenly distributed. That's really important. We talked about our hopes, we talked about our fears. I'm not going to share them, for now on this particular podcast. Maybe it's another podcast episode. But if people are prepared to share their fear, that's a really powerful thing, because then you can help someone when they know what they're afraid of. And I think that then applies across the organization. So I mentioned earlier about people having jobs. Like, it's not a given that people feel that their job is safe and secure. So my job is to really help reassure people, and to do that in terms of sharing power, quite often it means small steps. So don't give everyone all the power straight away, right? Because it's difficult to go from having no agency and no power to suddenly, if you could tomorrow make a decision that impacts a lot of people. So we've been working through with a coalition of the willing. So rather than starting the whole workforce, just trying to find people who are interested and want to try and help us move that forward, and working with them, and then scaling it up, trying things, getting things wrong, documenting them and saying, right, well, that didn't quite work. Maybe I wasn't clear, and trying to get people to have a shared worldview. It's been a really important part of that. I would say it doesn't work for everyone. I don't think there are always going to be some people who maybe don't trust, the work that we're doing. And whilst that's disappointing, I also accept that's a reality of the power dynamic, ultimately, for me being called, co-chief executive.
Lovely. Thank you. And thank you so much. I don't know. I mean, we can wind up now. I'm sure you've got important things to go to. Is there anything else you'd just like to add before we stop? Or
I would just say that thinking about the power you have or haven't got is a really important point. I think trying to, really understand that it's not personal when you're trying to operate at an organization level, but you can make it still feel a bit more human. You don't have to be robotic in trying to make it work. Being equitable and sharing power isn't about giving 100 people 1% each. It's
not mechanical, no, that way.
Yeah, and I think that is really challenging, point for you to do, and it's always a continuous, it's a continuous improvement cycle. And some days I feel like I've definitely got it down pat, and that the whole organization is trusting and etc. And then I might be the next interview from someone who says it's the worst place I've ever worked. So I think there's always space to get better, is what I would end with.
Yeah, lovely. Keep learning, and good luck to you with it all as you go forward. I'm sure everyone wishes you well. We will maybe invite you back in about a year's time or so, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And see how you're getting on. But thank you so much, Zak. Really appreciate that. And to everybody, that's all for today. We'll see you next time on the Healthy Power Alliance podcast.